Welcome to Bella Podcast. Get her down here. Get her down here. Danon poked Kat's shoulder while she was still rambling about Kai. The place where the two girls were stopping was about 10 meters from Uncle Toucan's grocery store, which meant that there was still a new distance to Danon's house. Thank you, Kat. I'll come and buy some things. I'll go back first. Kat smiled and said goodbye, seemingly not thinking at all about Danon's actions. In fact, what Danon wants is not to let anyone see her with a girl that she herself considers worthless. And this whole neighborhood has the same idea about Kat. But about 2 minutes later, Danon saw Kat turn around. She was a little startled when she caught a glimpse of Kat's face that was not covered by the mask, which was full of discomfort. But when she saw Danon, her eyes softened, as if she were smiling. I met a man who was standing at the end of the alley. I don't want to be haunted by him all my day. I'm going to take a tour to purify the air first. Kat said, then pulled up the mask, bowed to Danon, then turned the throttle and went away. Danon feels that Kat really hates that man named Kai. Just like a stigma. Suddenly, Danon realized that he had just discriminated against Kat. And Kat is discriminating against the Balkia guy. The Bal guy must also discriminate against someone. And like Kat, he will not know that he is being discriminated against by someone else like a plague. Danon suddenly thought of the concept of food chain that he studied in high school biology. That thought made her chuckle to herself. But that smile faltered when she wondered, is anyone stigmatizing her? At that moment, she saw Uncle Tu's grocery store appear in front of her. Recalling the story she heard here yesterday afternoon, for some reason, her throat suddenly felt dry and something inside her head turned like a pinwheel. Danon stopped by to buy a box of instant coffee and some snacks. Uncle Toucan hesitated for a while and then apologized for his wife's lack of sensitivity yesterday afternoon. But Danon politely said that it was a very normal thought, he should not be concerned. Uncle Tu smiled when he heard that and told her to still stop by this afternoon to take care of Mrs. Hai. By the way, have you seen a few strangers in your area lately? Danon did not pay much attention. Besides, it is the peak of the epidemic season, so most people are wearing masks. It is difficult to recognize anyone anymore. Thinking that, Danon shook his head slightly and greeted Uncle Tu to walk home. When a familiar house appeared in sight, Danon also conveniently looked at the small alley leading to Kat's motel room to see if there was a boyfriend that she mentioned. But it looks like he's gone. Just as Danon had just put the key in the lock of his house, suddenly a hand was placed on her shoulder. A little startled, she turned her back, jerked her shoulders slightly to let her other hand drop, and retreated into a defensive stance. Standing in front of her is a man. Of course, in the present time, everyone is wearing a mask.